Okay, ready to dive into a real unsettling mystery.
Always up for a good mystery. What have we got?
The case of Ted Bundy. But we're going deep into something a little different this time. We've got the Spanish version of his Wikipedia page.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're adding a layer of, what, global infamy to the mix.
Exactly. And, it's just wild how Bundy's story, even decades later, still grabs everyone's attention.
It is. It is. Like, what is it about this guy, seemingly normal, turns into, well, a monster? Why do we keep coming back to it?
That's the big question we're going to try and figure out. And this whole all-American facade he had, it's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, he wasn't some creepy guy hiding in the shadows. Bundy was charming, good-looking. He even worked on a suicide hotline at one point.
It's like, how do you even reconcile that image with, what he actually did?
Right, that's the key, isn't it? This total disconnect between who people thought Bundy was and the monster underneath.
Right.
Like, he was born Theodore Robert Cowell, grew up thinking his grandparents were his parents, then later took his stepfather's last name.
Huh.
And, this early life, while not, a sure sign of what he'd become, it gives us a glimpse maybe at a messed up sense of self.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Like, does that kind of, disruption, a shaky foundation early on, does that play a role in someone becoming capable of such horrific things?
That's the million-dollar question. Psychologists have been wrestling with that for years. There's no simple answer, nothing that explains, how a person turns into a serial killer.
Right.
But what we do see with Bundy early on is this pattern of manipulation, control. People described him as charismatic, intelligent, could charm his way into people's lives, gain their trust, and that's what's chilling. That played right into his crimes.
It's true. And then you have the victims. Starting in Washington and Utah, early 70s, young women start disappearing, mostly attractive, white. And the Spanish Wikipedia page, it points out how similar they looked. A lot of them had long, dark hair parted in the middle,
Yeah.
almost like a pattern. Some think it ties back to a woman from Bundy's past, Stephanie Brooks.
Yeah, the Stephanie Brooks connection. Fascinating, right? She was reportedly an early girlfriend who dumped him.
Oh, wow.
She's known as aimless, and some theorize that this rejection, that's what fueled his rage, maybe even influenced his type.
Chilling thought, isn't it? Like, someone rejects you and it triggers that kind of descent into darkness.
It is, and his methods, so disturbing, so calculated, the way he lured his victims, often faking injuries or pretending to be like an authority figure.
Right, right.
His whole MO was about exploiting vulnerability, trust. Can you imagine the terror? You think someone's there to help, and then bam, they're the danger. It points to some deep-seated sadism, like this desire to not only hurt, but to really enjoy having that power over someone else.
Yeah, you're right. It's awful. And then there was that close call with Carol Durant. She actually managed to escape after he tried to handcuff her in his Volkswagen Beetle.
Oh, yeah. Durant, she was incredible. So brave. Her escape and her testimony, that was huge. Led to them finding his car.
Right.
And inside, all this incriminating stuff, crowbar, handcuffs, rope, like a glimpse into a predator's toolkit.
There's bone-chilling. And yet, even with all those clues, even after they arrested him for kidnapping, the full extent of what he'd done, it was still hidden.
Exactly. He was still living this double life, lost student, seemingly normal guy, and then this shadow self, this monster lurking beneath.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, how can someone compartmentalize like that, separate those two realities in their head?
Yeah, that's what's so hard to wrap your head around, that compartmentalization, like how he could just separate these awful acts from his everyday life.
Right.
It speaks to just a chilling detachment, a lack of empathy. That's what let him function while doing these horrible things. It really is. It's almost like he created this alternate persona, this monster he could just slip into and out of whenever he wanted. But his carefully crafted world, it started to fall apart, didn't it?
It did.
I mean, he was convicted for kidnapping Durant, but that wasn't the end of his story. Not even close.
No, not at all. Things actually got even darker. Bundy, always the manipulator, he escaped from custody. Not once, but twice.
Oh, man.
First time, right out of a courthouse library, jumped out of a window, led authorities on a 6-day manhunt.
Are you serious? It's almost unbelievable.
It is. And the second escape, even more audacious. He made this hole in the ceiling of his jail cell, planned the whole thing out, vanished in the night, popped up in Florida.
Wow.
And these escapes, they weren't just acts of, desperation. These were calculated moves, showing how cunning he was, how resourceful. He outsmarted the system that was trying to keep him locked up.
It's incredible. And Florida, well, that became the stage for his most brutal acts, the Chi Omega sorority house attacks. The details, they're just horrific.
They are breaking in, bludgeoning 4 young women. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were killed. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, they were left with severe injuries.
It's awful.
The level of violence, it was a terrifying escalation. It wasn't about abduction anymore. It wasn't just about control. There was this rage, this brutality. It was almost unimaginable.
All right.
And then just weeks later, he abducts and murders 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his youngest victim.
Like the mask was totally off at that point. The monster, it was fully unleashed. Thankfully, his reign of terror ended soon after. He was arrested in Pensacola. He was driving a stolen vehicle, tried to run away on foot, but they finally got him. No more escapes that time.
Nope. The final chapter for Bundy played out in the courtroom, and he chose to represent himself.
Oh, wow.
Almost like a narcissist's dream, right? It let him manipulate, control the narrative even more.
Didn't he just love that attention, that spotlight? He tried to play the charming, innocent role, but the evidence was just overwhelming, especially that bite mark on Lisa Levy's body. A direct physical link. It sealed his fate.
It did. That bite mark, crucial piece of forensic evidence. It's a chilling reminder of how physical his crimes were, the brutality. The jury found him guilty on all counts, sentenced to death.
And even on death row, Bundy still held this strange power, didn't he? He started confessing to some of his crimes, even offered to help find victims' remains. It's like he was playing a game with the authorities to delay his execution.
It is. It's like even facing his own death, he was still trying to maintain control. And these confessions, they gave some families closure, but they all brought up more questions. Was it real remorse? Or just another manipulation? We're left trying to understand his psyche, the darkness that drove him.
Right, and that's the mystery that lingers, the why behind it all. We have the details of his crimes, this chilling timeline in the Spanish Wikipedia page, but what truly created this monster?
It's the question, isn't it? They did all these psychological assessments on Bundy, but there was no clear diagnosis. Psychopath, sociopath, bipolar disorder. The experts debated, never really agreed.
Right.
And of course, he famously blamed pornography for fueling his violent fantasies, said it escalated his desires out of control.
But is that a real explanation, or just him shifting blame?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, we have to acknowledge the harm that pornography can cause, but to put all the blame on it for what Bundy did, that would be a dangerous oversimplification. His crimes, ultimately, they were about power, control, a deep-seated misogyny that came out in the most horrible ways.
Yeah. And the Spanish Wikipedia page, it talks about the fascination people still have with his case. Books, documentaries, films, even a Netflix series. Why do we keep revisiting this darkness?
That's a good question. Maybe it's morbid curiosity, this need to understand just how depraved humans can be. Or maybe it's a way to face our own fears, try to make sense of the senseless.
Maybe there's a strange kind of comfort in studying these cases, like we're trying to learn from the past, protect ourselves from becoming victims.
Yeah, I can see that, but in looking for answers, we can't glorify these individuals. Bundy was a monster, a master manipulator who used his charm to prey on vulnerable people. We should never forget the lives he destroyed, the pain he inflicted.
Going through the Spanish Wikipedia page, it's just hard to ignore the sheer number of victims. It's a long list, and even then they think there are more we'll never know about. It's chilling. The scope of his brutality, it's just...
Yeah, it's a grim reminder. The human cost of Bundy's crimes. Each name, that's a life question, a family shattered, a community trying to cope with this horrible loss. It's so important to remember that behind all the headlines, the psychology, there are real people whose lives were forever changed by what he did.
Right. The article, it goes into how his killing spree, it went on for years across multiple states, leaving this trail of devastation everywhere he went. It's like he was always on the move, always looking for the next victim.
Yeah, and that constant movement, never staying in one place for long, maybe it reflects his inner turmoil, like his own sense of self was so fractured, he was running from something, maybe from his own demons, but tragically, he was leaving victims behind wherever he went.
And it's just disturbing. The article talks about how even after he'd committed these crimes, he would sometimes go back to the places where he'd left the bodies, even took trophies, photographs, body parts. It's a level of depravity that's just hard to grasp.
Yeah, and that's where we're trying to understand his psychology gets really disturbing. It wasn't enough for him to just commit the act. He had to keep reliving it, exert his control even after death, like this deep-seated need to dominate, this fascination with death that went beyond the killing itself.
It's a dark side of human nature. It's terrifying and kind of fascinating at the same time. But even with all this darkness, there were some glimmers of light, right? Stories of resilience, bravery in the face of unimaginable horror.
Absolutely. The article mentions Carol Durant. She managed to escape from Bundy, and she later testified against him. Her story it's amazing. It shows the strength of the human spirit, the will to survive, the courage to fight back even when faced with something so terrifying. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of overcoming even the worst things.
And we can't forget the work of law enforcement. All the people who dedicated themselves to tracking Bundy down, piecing together all the evidence, and in the end, it was their work that led to his capture and conviction.
Absolutely. Their efforts, they were crucial. They show the dedication, the perseverance of everyone who works to bring justice to victims, to their families. It reminds us that even though there's evil in the world, there are also people who fight against it, who dedicate their lives to protecting the innocent.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the enigma of Ted Bundy, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away from all this?
Well, I think it's crucial to remember that while we've spent this time exploring the darkness of Bundy's mind, the brutality of what he did, we've also seen the strength of his victims, of those who fought to bring him to justice. Their stories, they should inspire us to be vigilant, to be advocates for safety, to never forget the victims of these horrible acts, and maybe, as we continue to try and understand this case, to grapple with all the unsettling question it raises, we can find some solace in knowing that even when facing unimaginable evil, the human spirit can endure, and ultimately, it can triumph.
Well said. The case of Ted Bundy, it's a harsh reminder of how complex human nature can be, the darkness that can hide beneath the surface, and how important it is to understand, to address, the things that lead to these horrific acts. But it also highlights the strength of the human spirit, the power of resilience, and the importance of fighting for justice, of advocating for the safety and well-being of everyone. Let's keep those lessons with us as we move forward. Let's work towards a world where tragedies like this become a distant memory.